Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every life when the questions grow louder than the answers, when the familiar structures seem to dissolve, and we are left with the vast, quiet, unknown. It is here in this space of uncertainty that something extraordinary begins to unfold, if we allow it. Trusting God is not a strategy for getting what you want. It is a path toward discovering who you truly are, beyond fear, beyond doubt, beyond separation, fresh. And when you live in that trust, you don't need to chase miracles. You become one. The present moment is often overlooked because the mind is habitually caught in the movement of time. So it races toward the future, anxious about what might happen, or clings to the past, replaying what has already occurred. But in doing so, we miss the only place where life is actually happening. Here and now, trusting God begins not with effort, but with presence. It is not something we strive to achieve later. It is something we return to right now. When we talk about finding miracles and trusting God, we are not referring to something distant or abstract. The miracle is in the very act of trusting, and that trust can only be experienced in the stillness of the present. The moment you bring your full attention to now, you open the door to a deeper intelligence, a peace that passes understanding. This is where God becomes real, not as a concept, but as a living, breathing presence within and around you. In the present moment, there is no fear. Fear only exists in anticipation. What if this happens? What if that doesn't work out? But when you are fully here with what is, you realize you are already being supported. You are breathing. Your heart is beating. Life is sustaining you without your doing anything. This is not a small thing. This is the miracle of being. Trust arises naturally when we stop resisting what is, being what is. Resistance is the ego's way of trying to control life. It judges, complains, and projects. It says, this shouldn't be happening, or I need to figure this out before I can be at peace. But peace does not come after figuring things out. It comes when we drop into the awareness that right now, even without having all the answers, we are held. We are not alone. There is something greater unfolding. Learning to trust God is not a mental exercise, it is experiential. It is the felt sense of letting go into the moment of not needing to be anywhere else, not needing life to be different in order to rest. That resting is powerful. It is transformative because when we rest in the now, we stop feeding the mind's chaos. We step out of reaction and into response. We listen more deeply. We act more clearly. In this presence, what once looked like a problem begins to soften. You may not receive a solution immediately, but you begin to sense that you are not the one who must carry it all alone. You feel accompanied. This inner shift is the beginning of miracles, not always dramatic, but deeply profound. An anxious heart begins to calm. A confused mind begins to quiet. A closed perspective begins to open. These are signs of grace. These are signs of... The mind will always try to tell you that trusting requires more information, more certainty. But trust, by its nature, is a step into the unknown. The present moment is the only place where we can take that step because it is the only place where God is fully alive to us. In the now, we are not waiting for miracles. We are noticing them. We are becoming aware of the small, sacred rhythms that are already guiding us. When you begin to live in the present with openness, you find that you are no longer chasing peace. Peace is where you are. And from that peace, trust begins to flower, not as a belief, but as a knowing. You begin to realize that life is not happening to you, but through you. And that is the miracle that trusting God reveals moment by moment. Trusting God is often misunderstood as a passive state, something we turn to only when circumstances feel overwhelming or beyond our control. But true trust is not about what happens on the outside. It's about what takes place within. It is not a conditional response to favorable outcomes. It is a conscious alignment with something deeper than the surface of events. Trusting God, in its truest form, is not a reaction to life going our way. It is a state of being that remains steady, even when nothing makes sense. Outer circumstances are always in motion. They rise and fall, expand and contract. Sometimes we experience joy, success, clarity. Other times, we find ourselves in confusion, loss, or stillness. If our sense of trust is tied to these fluctuations, then we are forever at the mercy of change. But inner trust is something else. It does not shift based on outcomes. It is a quiet, grounded knowing that beneath the chaos of the world, there is order. Beneath the unknown, there is wisdom. Beneath fear, there is love. This kind of trust begins with acceptance. Not the kind of resignation that says, I guess this is just how it is, but a deeper, more peaceful kind of allowing. It is saying yes to what is, not because you enjoy the difficulty, but because you recognize that life is working through you in ways your mind cannot always grasp. When we stop fighting what is happening, we create space for clarity to enter. This space is where transformation begins, you see. Much of our suffering comes not from events themselves, but from our resistance to them. We label things as wrong or unfair, and we mentally struggle against them. But trust asks us to meet life with openness rather than opposition. It is a surrender, not in weakness, but in wisdom. We stop trying to control every detail, and instead, we begin to cooperate with a force that knows more than our limited perspective. And this is where the miracle lies. When we trust from within, our outer world begins to reflect that peace. It doesn't mean problems disappear overnight, but we stop reacting from fear, and we start responding from presence. We don't force solutions. We allow them to arise. We become less driven by urgency and more guided by clarity. Trust also teaches us to become still. In a world that is always demanding action, stillness can feel counterintuitive. But in that stillness, we begin to sense what our next step truly is. And sometimes that next step is simply to wait. To rest, to listen. Trust is not about doing nothing. It is about doing the right thing from a place of calm alignment rather than anxious striving. As this inner alignment deepens, we start to see life differently. Events we once labeled as mistakes or misfortunes may begin to reveal hidden purpose. Closed doors are understood as redirection. Delays are seen as preparation. This shift in perception is one of the most profound expressions of trust, when we begin to view everything as part of a larger unfolding, not just the parts we like. Ultimately, trusting God is not about manipulating life to fit our preferences. It is about recognizing that there is a rhythm to all things. When we live in tune with that rhythm, when our inner state reflects faith rather than fear, we open ourselves to a different kind of life. A life marked not by the absence of challenges, but by the presence of peace in the midst of them. This is what it means to live in inner alignment with the divine. This is the miracle of trust. The ego, by its very nature, resists trust. It thrives on control, uncertainty, on having a clearly defined identity built from past experiences and future projections. It is uncomfortable with surrender because surrender means letting go of the illusion of control. And yet, it is precisely in this letting go that we begin to experience the miraculous. Trusting God begins when we recognize the ego's resistance for what it is, fear in disguise, and choose to no longer be governed by it. The ego is the voice in your mind that says, I must figure this out, or I must fix this now. It fears the unknown because in the unknown it loses its grip. The ego believes that safety lies in control, in prediction, in planning every detail. But life, as we know, is not controllable in that way. It moves in cycles, in mysteries, in timings that the mind cannot fully comprehend. So when things don't go according to plan, the ego reacts with anxiety, frustration, or despair. This is the moment when we are invited to trust, not as a final resort, but as a conscious act of freedom. To let go does not mean to give up. It means to release the need to make everything happen by force. It means to acknowledge that there is a higher order working through the fabric of life, even when we cannot see it. Trusting God is stepping out of the ego's small, fearful story and into a larger, more spacious awareness where peace is possible, even in the midst of uncertainty. Letting go is not a one-time decision. It is a practice. It is a moment-to-moment choice to breathe, to pause, to soften. When fear arises, instead of reacting or suppressing it, we simply notice it, we create space around it. We say, here is fear again, and we invite compassion in. In doing so, we stop feeding the ego's narrative and begin aligning with presence. The miracle begins here, not in dramatic changes in our outer life, but in subtle shifts within. For we move from tension to openness, from grasping to receiving, from controlling to allowing. And as our inner world changes, the outer world begins to reflect it. Opportunities we once forced now flow toward us with ease. Solutions we couldn't imagine begin to appear, not from effort, but from clarity. When we let go, we also let go of the need to be someone, to prove, to perform, to be seen in a certain way. The ego is always constructing identity. I am successful because of this. Or E, am lovable if I do that. But in trust, we rest in something deeper than identity. We begin to sense that who we are is not defined by external achievement or failure, but by a still, sacred presence within. We are not trying to become something. We are simply being. This kind of trust is radical because it goes against everything we've been taught about self-reliance, ambition, and control. But it is not passive. It is an active surrender, a deep listening to the flow of life, and a willingness to move in harmony with it. When we act from trust, we do not abandon responsibility. We just stop carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. Ultimately, the ego's resistance is a doorway. When we meet it with awareness and compassion, it becomes the very path through which trust is born. Born. Each time we let go, we come closer to the truth that we are already held, already guided, already whole. And in that realization, we begin to see that the miracle was never far away. It was within us, waiting for space to arise. A miracle is often thought of as something extraordinary, a sudden event or change that defies the laws of nature. But in the context of trusting God, miracles are not always dramatic shifts in external circumstances. Rather, they are profound shifts in perception. When we choose to trust, we begin to see the world through a different lens, and this shift is the very essence of what we consider a miracle. The world we perceive through the lens of the ego is often one of separation, scarcity, and struggle. We see ourselves as separate from others, disconnected from the flow of life, constantly fighting against the current or attempting to control the outcome. In this state, we are blind to the deeper currents of love, peace, and unity that run through all things. But when we trust, we begin to step out of this narrow, fragmented view of reality and into a larger, more expansive perspective. The moment we truly trust God, we begin to shift from seeing life as a series of random events to recognizing that there is an underlying order and intelligence at work. Life is no longer something happening to us. It is something unfolding with purpose and grace. The seemingly chaotic and disconnected pieces of our lives begin to fall into place in ways that we may never have expected. We begin to notice synchronicities, patterns, and signs that were always there but hidden from our sight. Trusting God brings us to a place where we can see with clearer eyes. The frustration we once felt in difficult circumstances begins to dissolve. We realize that every challenge, every obstacle is not a punishment or a random occurrence, but an invitation for growth and transformation. We start to see that our struggles are not without purpose. They are part of the divine process of shaping and refining us. What once seemed like a setback now appears as an opportunity for learning, for deepening, for becoming more attuned to the present moment. A miracle in this sense is a shift from fear to love. It is the realization that we are always supported, even when we cannot see the full picture. It is the awareness that everything is unfolding in perfect timing, and that our lives are not a series of disconnected incidents, but part of a grand, interconnected whole. This shift in perception does not always change our outer circumstances immediately, but it changes the way we relate to them. When we trust, we stop seeing ourselves as victims of circumstance, and instead, we begin to recognize that we are active participants in a divine dance. In this new perspective, we begin to experience peace in the midst of turmoil, joy in the face of hardship, and contentment, even when external circumstances are not ideal. The miracle is not in the absence of difficulty, but in the presence of peace within the difficulty. Trusting God allows us to live from a place of deep assurance, knowing that no matter what happens, we are part of something much greater than ourselves. Furthermore, this shift in perception is not just a mental exercise. It is a spiritual experience. As we let go of the need to control and allow ourselves to trust, we begin to align with a greater truth, a truth that transcends the limitations of the ego and touches on the divine. In this alignment, we are no longer bound by judgments of the mind. We see beyond the surface, recognizing the divinity in all things. The people we once judged, the circumstances we once resisted, all begin to reveal themselves as part of a larger, sacred whole. Miracles, then, are not just things that happen. They are things we perceive. When we trust, we open our hearts and minds to the possibility of seeing the world in a new way. What once seemed ordinary now becomes extraordinary. What once seemed broken now appears whole. What once seemed like a struggle is now understood as an opportunity for growth. And in this shift, we experience the true miracle of trusting God, the transformation of our inner world, which ultimately transforms our outer reality. In the end, trusting God is not about waiting for specific, tangible miracles to appear. It is about opening ourselves to the constant unfolding miracle of life itself. It is about shifting our perception to see that we are always supported, always loved, and always connected to the divine. This shift in perception, this shift in how we see and experience the world, is the true miracle we are all capable of experiencing when we choose to trust. In conclusion, the journey of finding miracles and trusting God is not one of waiting for extraordinary events to happen in our lives, but rather a deep inner transformation that shifts how we experience the world. Oh, trusting God invites us into the present moment where miracles are found not in grand gestures, but in our ability to surrender, to be still, and to accept life as it unfolds. It is about aligning our hearts and minds with a divine flow that transcends the surface of events and reveals a deeper truth, one of connection, purpose, and peace. The trust we cultivate within us is not dependent on external circumstances. It is an inner knowing that no matter the appearance of things, there is a greater intelligence at work, guiding us, holding us, and supporting us. The miracle begins when we stop resisting life and allow ourselves to flow with it. When we release the need to control and let go of fear, we open ourselves to the profound shift in perception that allows us to see the world through a lens of love, peace, and unity. In the end, the true miracle of trusting God lies not in the events that unfold, but in the transformation that takes place within us. It is the miracle of peace amidst chaos, clarity amidst confusion, and joy amidst hardship. By trusting, we discover that we are already held, already loved, and already part of a larger divine unfolding. When we trust, we become the miracle we seek. Thank you